Welcome to Twin Talk Politics.
Alright, hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Twin Talk Politics, where today we are so honored to be joined by MP Bains, a Member of Parliament for Steveston, Richmond East. We actually had the opportunity to talk to MP Bains earlier this month at a table tennis tournament, but we're so excited to, this time, be sitting down at his amazing constituency office without table tennis rackets and talk to him about so many things that both of us are really passionate about. Before we get into any of that, how are you doing today, MP Bains?
I'm doing great now that you guys are here. I mean, I'm really impressed by both of you.
Thank you.
You know, taking the interest in doing this. So I'm happy to see that you're here.
Yeah, great. We're really happy too. Yeah. So, in tradition with our podcast, and as you probably know, the first question is always a question to see how good your luck is today. So, MP Bains, we were wondering if you could take that wild 50-50 guess at who do you think is Jason and who do you think is Jerry?
Jason, Jerry.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Wow. Not a lot of people get that right on the first try, so congratulations on that. With that very important question out of the way, let's just jump straight into the interview. So the first question we have for you today is we were wondering maybe if you could please introduce yourself, what got you really interested and engaged in politics, and maybe if you're willing to share some of your passions that you love to do outside of politics in your free time.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, it's one of those things where you sometimes don't know how you get involved in certain things, right? Like when you're growing up in this city, like for me, I grew up in Richmond my whole life, really invested in the city. I was very fortunate to be able to play sports and just be, you know, have a lot of friends and be around different activities. As you know, Richmond was one of the hotbeds of athletics.
Yeah.
And I grew up around a lot of really strong athletes. Really, that's what it was. Elementary school I went to produced so many strong athletes. I went to Kingswood Elementary School, which is not too far from my office here. But and ultimately, you know, your parents are the ones who sort of introduce you to activities and these kinds of things. Gravitated towards soccer. That's something that I really grew up doing. From there, you know, ultimately, like a lot of our sports community here in Richmond. It is a community, right? You have these associations and people involved and parents and people come together. You see everybody at the field on the weekend. And from there, tournaments and my parents were both involved in the community quite a bit. My dad was, in the summer, for example, you would have the soccer season now, as you know, every sport is all year round.
Yeah.
Back then it was seasonal, right? And then in the summer we didn't have anything, so my dad, my uncles, they'd put together a association and they'd host tournaments in the summer. And from there we were playing all year round and it just became a really big passion. But from there, that tournament had other different disciplines as well. There was wrestling there was all kinds of other things. So it was like a cultural tournament too. So, and you see them now too happening, but from there, you know, there was a strong sense of community here in Richmond. Families got together, and you know, then you get connected to city officials and so on and so forth, just through that network. So, and Richmond, I still believe it's like that. I still believe we have strong community associations, societies here. You know, whether it's the Richmond Community Foundation, Richmond Cares, Richmond Gives, and so many different ones. So I think that gives you a little bit of sense of being safe and being a part of a good community. You know, from there, you know, growing up, you're just I went to school just like everybody else and continued on, and never thought I was going to be ending up in the House of Commons. Even as early as like 4 or 5 years ago, I didn't think so. But you know, it's a little bit of a long answer how I got there, but it is one of those stories where you know, your career and the steps you take, you sort of end up in certain places, right? And I think, and I always look at, you know, and my parents are probably doing one of these shoes, right? Because they probably didn't think I was going to do, you know, they weren't sure what I was going to do. So, you know, and that's one of those things that I think even for, I know you talked a little bit about, you know, for youth today, you know, you never know where you're going to end up. I think that's one of the things that was part of my life growing up in the city, being a part of it. And I know people were there to sort of, you know, volunteer coaching hours and stuff for you. So you you sort of, if you're raised in that sort of an environment, I think then you continue on. And I started coaching at a young age.
Yeah.
Coaching at a young age, which led to, other community associations knowing, who you are. And I think you touched on it a little bit earlier in our discussions about the issues around, at-risk youth safety. And I always knew that, this is something that I know helped me, my friends, continue on through life and be a part of something great where I still have the same friends that I grew up with in the city, right? So, that led to other issues though. So, there's a lot of kids that don't have that and didn't get that opportunity.
Yeah.
So how can we help others? And I was approached by another, elder in the community who was a psychologist, but also did a lot of work on with at-risk youth, families and working there. And the issue of gang violence was on the rise, the late 80s, early 90s. And I was still in high school, but at that time, and then as the issue sort of began, trying to where community members are trying to figure out, okay, how can we help these youth? There's an issue here that's getting bigger and bigger. Sure. And that's where there was a forum that was held in Richmond years ago, I would say, in the early 90s, and academics, people came together, government officials, judges, and people who had the ability to make regulatory changes and things like that. So that sort of, and now at that time I'm coaching soccer and I'm involved in that way. I was approached to say, hey, can you bring some youth there? And I did. I brought some youth there. I had an opportunity to just sort of mention, give some feedback and say, there's recreation's a great aspect, but you also have to think about, when it comes to youth, not everybody can excel in athletics. Not everybody can excel in academics. Mm-hmm. It's always, you have to find, and our teachers do a great job of this, to sort of, in the classroom, if they can identify who needs more work or who needs more help, those kinds of things. And at that time, it was one of those things where the community came together and said, how are we going to solve this? And I was there and said, I think recreation's one piece, but I think we need to get the message out, and our institutions, our community associations all need to sort of do that work, whether it's the religious institutions or others. Everybody need to participate. And from that point, that day, actually, I was working at, I'm not only am I coaching, but I'm working as an aircraft mechanic, and because that was a high school job I had, working at the airport just in baggage, and I moved into, I did the aircraft maintenance program, and so now we're talking like a little bit post high school. And at that time, I was approached by an elected official who said, we need someone to help liaise with the community and government. And it was a new government at the time, and at the time, the Premier Gordon Campbell came in as a new premier, and there was a Minister of State for Mental Health. He was Dr. Gozar Chima, approached me and said, we need someone that can sort of liaise with the community. And, aircraft maintenance was great, but there was a decision, it's sort of timing-wise. Yeah. The Air Canada had decided to move the hangar from Vancouver, or at least the heavy maintenance part, the work that used to be done there, and to go to Winnipeg, Calgary, and Toronto. Yeah. See, I had the same thinking right at the time, like, I like it here. So, and then I took the time to sort of think about, can I do that other job and work there? And as soon as I got it, and I spent a little bit of time just sort of training and working with the Minister of State for Mental Health there, and ultimately I took the role on, and very quickly after that I started getting more responsibilities assigned to me, and my role changed, and I became a media relations officer, and then a public relations officer. I applied for a scholarship, and I was awarded a Pacific Leadership Scholarship to do my master's degree, and I went back to school while I was working, and I completed that, and then it led to a strong professional career in public service within the BC government. And at that time, you're able to. The first thing I did actually at the time was I was able to host a meeting on the issue of at-risk youth between the Solicitor General, the Attorney General, the community leaders, and brought people together. And it was a time where, you know, the community members were also a little bit divided. There's a lot of denial in the community, the stigma attached to, oh, my kid doesn't need help versus who does, or these kinds of things. And I'm not going to get into the depths of, you know, those studies, let's say, right? But at that time, then it was a matter of bringing people together and getting something done. And that meeting led to the establishment of what we know now as the Combined Forces Special Engagement Unit, which is the gang task force, which was sort of disbanded because there was small forces at the time that were assigned to certain things, and now it became one big unit. And we all know that the major contribution went towards that in establishing its own like a police service, which is situated in Surrey right now. But and it was one of those moments I said, oh wow, you know, like you can do things here, you can make some changes, and you know, in this role. And it was just a simpler, at that time it was a staffing role, but you're able to put forward ideas and get things, you know, moving and understanding the community and learning from people and the people who are working so hard to do a lot of things. You have people in our universities, our teachers, everyone's trying to work together to, you know, ultimately make a, you know, great society for ourselves to live here. And yeah, so that led me into that career, learning, and I had a unique role. It was because I was able to work in on the mainland, where most of the communications department staff would be on the island, and and then my assignments were to support every minister and the premier's office. Wow. So I was able to learn different files, and I think that is actually what helped me sort of move forward into, and then understanding how to navigate different offices and get things done. Really is what you ideally want to be able to do if you're an elected official. So that was sort of the beginning, the long story. Got there, and after I left BC government for a bit, I felt like I needed to do, you know, get some more corporate or different type of communications experience, but I ended up going into teaching, and I taught at Kwantlen Polytechnic for about 4 years. And then I was approached by a few other members of parliament who said that there's an opportunity here to, if you know, I think, especially being the opportunity here in Steveston, Richmond East, this area, and me being from here and being a local, someone who's local, who's done a lot of the work in the community and had that connection on a grassroots level. They felt that, you know, I could be a good candidate for that. And I said, yeah, and now I'm here. And now Jason and Jerry are here at the table. That's the longest story, and you'll probably hear it. But that really is how I got into it. Because it's not as simple as saying, oh, because, you know, because of this or that.
Yeah, wow, definitely it was very cool and inspiring, just how every single thing you did in life ultimately led you down this amazing path, and now you're this amazing MP that represents so many cool people. So yeah, that's really, really cool. Our second question actually comes in two parts. So first, we are wondering, what are your thoughts and what do you think are the biggest problems concerning youth in Canada as a whole? And then secondly, what do you think are the biggest problems for youth in your own constituency?
I think, well, it's different we have a huge country, right? And there's different concerns for youth in different areas. You have rural parts, right? Do they have access to certain services, supports, things like that? And, you know, how far is their school? For sure. You know, like, it's very complex, but I think the biggest issue is, you know, I think for youth really right now is I believe that there's been tremendous amount of investments and growth that is coming to Canada, but with that comes other challenges like, you know, how fast are we growing? Is there housing? Is there a future of housing for our youth, right? I think, and I can relate because, you know, after my studies, I became a professional. I still lived at home, and I lived at home for probably. I only moved out when I did that. Like I worked like as a professional in the BC government for like 6 years. I graduated, did all this, and even when I got married, my wife and I, we lived out in my parents' basement, and we were able to get grounded and find get on our own 2 feet, be able to sort of then branch out and go do whatever we needed to do. But I think a lot of people are in that situation,
for sure.
and I'm not sure everybody right now has the opportunity to be able to say, hey, that's exactly how I'm going to start. So we need to be able to provide those options.
Yeah.
Right. And I think and we can have a lengthy discussion on the housing piece, but I think that's one, just for the sake of understanding, like, what are the biggest issues. I think that is a safe place to call home, being able to maybe grow. If you really love this community, are you able to stay here?
Yeah.
And so when you bring it back to Richmond's issues are always, it's an affluent city. It's sort of it's expensive here, and that comes with the region, right? We live in probably one of the most desirable places in the world,
for sure.
right? And then you have a city that's Vancouver, which is a dynamic city. It's a port city. We have so much here that's integral to our economic activity in this country, right? We're almost making up almost over 30% of our economy relies upon our port network, our rail, our YVR, and all of these things. So that means there's work here, there's jobs here, there's these things where people want to stay here, but then how much capacity is there for that? That's the job that we have to continue to work on and keep pushing towards, whether we have infrastructure and these kinds of things. So I would say, like, for youth, that optimism of being able to just afford something and be an owner, or like have ownership of a home. I think that we need to ensure that that's there. And other than that, I think, like, if you look at the issues around affordability or those things, is there a job that will allow me to absorb those costs?
Yeah.
Right. So that's for the next generation. We want to be able to make sure that they understand that we're working on that.
For sure. Yeah, following the vein of housing, it is a topic that's on top of so many youth's mind. Canadians overall, is a topic of affordability, as you said, and the cost of living, but specifically housing. In fact, 6 out of 10 young Canadians right now who doesn't own a home state that they've actually given up on ever owning one because of how expensive it is to live in a home in Canada. And we know this is an issue that's very prevalent across Canada, but also specifically within Richmond too, because it's one of the best communities and the best neighborhoods to live in. So we, alongside so many Canadians, have been really inspired and thankful for all your work you've done. For instance, securing over $36 million via the Housing Accelerator Fund for the future of housing for Richmond, or be a key supporter for the Rapid Housing Initiative. So our question for you is, we were wondering maybe if you could explain how these initiatives will directly help your specific constituency, but also on a macro level, what are your hopes for the future of Canada in terms of housing and affordability?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I love getting into this because it is a technical piece, right?
Yeah.
What is that $36 million going to do? It's the objective behind that was that the city of Richmond needed to put an application in and keep in mind the National Housing Strategy, Canada's housing plan. For years it didn't exist. Right. This is new because provinces, municipalities, and we respect the fact that they think they know how best to develop or build their community, right, or a province. However, we can't always have it our way. At the same time, they also want growth. Yeah. They want jobs, and then they want the economic impact of in their city. But then you have to. That maybe that plan that they have is not the greatest, right? So. And I mean, for years here, for example, I'll get into the piece of what the city applied for, but I think the biggest issue then is, you're going to have people here. We've been talking about 1 million people coming to this region for over 15 years now. I was working in the province at the time, and I mean, it's not like this is a new problem. everybody had to have continued to work towards this. And because we have, when we look at some of the arguments being made, and they're saying, well, now you have all of these people coming, whether it's through immigration or the international student phase, you have people coming. They're here to fill positions because, quite frankly, there's certain roles that Canadians are not actually willing to do, right? So there's other roles that Canadians, or we have issues around our fertility rate, right? We're not having as many kids, and being able to then train the next generation. We just went through the largest workforce change in Canadian history.
Wow.
Okay, that means the boomers and their kids, right, are now in retirement.
Yeah.
Or getting to retirement. So who's filling these roles? How are we able to? So it's a capacity issue there, right? And when it comes to the province, when it comes to, say, the BCPNP program or other, each province has their programs that they are their investor class or so-and-so class that they're trying to fill these specific roles, and they ask the federal government, we need people for this. Every industry I can think of, whether it's trucking, everywhere from trucking to caregiving and health sector or so and so, everybody needs people, right? So we have to do it in multiple ways. We need to ensure that we're continue to grow and invest in those right areas, whether it's infrastructure and all these things. But at the same time, we have to fill those roles and train people. So it's a lot of different moving parts. And the city of Richmond, how are they going to, how are we going to resolve what's happening here? And I talked earlier about options. People need options. When young people are looking at the options, and I'm a young person right now, which I'm not, but and you go on realty.ca, what do you see? You'll see an apartment, 1 or 2 bedroom. You'll see maybe an older home, then a townhouse options, massive home, and then you can go, sky's sort of the limit. That's it. If you look at the cycle of a person's life, right? You're at home, you're in the school, your elementary years, etc. Then you've become now a university or a postgraduate student, right? Post-secondary student. You need student housing, right? Do we have enough? Then after that, when you've graduated, you're now a professional. You need to step up from that. What's next? A 1-bedroom apartment or condo? And is that attainable? No, we need something in between, maybe a micro condo, right? Then after that, you have that. Then you may be able to step up and go into the one bedroom, then the 2. Then now you're what they call a DINK, double income, right? No kids, right? And maybe you can get into something else, right?
Sure.
So there's that step up. But do we have options along the way? No, we have to create those. Municipalities have to change zoning. They have to be able to say, okay, we're willing to build some of these types of options, right? And that's where, when it came to Richmond, their application was, there's a need for the missing middle. It's been widely discussed, written, studied by experts in the housing industry, right? And not only the missing middle options, what other criteria can we fit in here? So the gentle density piece is what the city had applied for, and they're willing to make changes there. And then coupled with what the province, Bill 44 and some other measures they've introduced recently, there's a number of municipalities now that are working on agreements on building things like more duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, sixplexes. It gives an opportunity for families to come into neighborhoods, right? And if you look at like my neighborhood I live in, and I live in the neighborhood that I grew up in, and I moved around a little bit. I bought like an old home and I renovated it. I eventually sold that, and then I was able to find a divided property where I could build a smaller home. And my view on that is, especially where the elementary schools are, and the way Richmond's set up, like a lot of cities, right? You have these massive properties, and people will come in, and they'll tear that house down. That's an old, maybe 40-year-old home, that's maybe only taking up, say, 20% of that property, and all of a sudden they'll build one big one. But the value is like, who's moving in? It's someone maybe, moving from different jurisdictions, selling their older home, like in Vancouver, and then saying, oh, I'm going to make this big one here in Richmond. But who's coming in there? Like we in order to have a healthy community, I truly believe, we need families. We need people who have a chance. Young professionals who are in a relationship to say, okay, you know what, we're going to come together here, and then you got kids in the school and this and that. That's what community's about, right?
For sure. Yeah, I think the part that you really talked about that was really interesting and really inspiring to me was like providing community members that piece of choice that they really deserve. Yeah, another topic that's very top of mind for so many youth, as you talked about earlier in your introduction, is the topic of gang violence. In fact, reports have shown in Canada that currently there's 434 youth gangs, around with 7,000 members across the country. So we know that you've been very involved in efforts to combat issues of gang violence even before becoming an MP, whether that be, as you sort of said earlier, really being engaged in the youth community, whether that's mentoring youth or interacting with them by being a sports coach, or your current position of serving as the vice chair of the Richmond Community Foundation. And we know that for Richmond, you've done so much, specifically the $2.68 million fund for Building Safe Communities Fund to really prevent gun crime and gun violence throughout the city as a whole. So we know this is such an amazing initiative that does a lot. For example, providing like low cost to no cost meals, creating support groups, and all that really cool initiatives. So we were wondering, could you explain maybe how effective these programs are at really tackling some of the really underlying issues and causes of youth gang violence?
Yeah, I think again, it's always, and I'll come at it in a way of volunteerism. There's a lot of people in the community who try to do a lot of different things in helping in whichever way possible on the issues of at-risk youth and how can we help them and these kinds of things. But if it's just done at a volunteer level, it's really tough to maintain people who, right? So you have people who are academics, they're doing it in their role, they're specific to it. I think when it comes to the funding piece, you have to support these things. And it's important because then experts can look at how can we target specific areas and look at the data, where are these incidents happening, who needs the help, right? And that takes work. That's why the funding is important for that. And with respect to the Building Safer Communities, it was in partnership with the RCMP here, the city itself, and then the city's going to deliver those programs saying, hey, you know what, we're seeing, is there more awareness needed? Do we need to educate the families a little bit better? Because keep in mind, you gave the big number about the gangs and this and that. The organized gangs, the street level gang and organized crime, a whole different world, right? Yeah. And they only exist because of the organized crime people, whether it's the Hells Angels or others, right? Yeah. So you have, and that's probably the largest organized crime group, that we know of, that probably still have a lot of control of what takes place and whose area is what, who's allowed to operate any type of criminal activity in a certain area. And then there's others, right? There's global organized crime, right? That impacting not just Canada, but so many different countries, allied countries and non-allied countries. And so it's a big scope that we have to always consider. And in the end, their objective is that they're trying to make money as quick as possible, whether it could be anything. So, I think that fight is going to continue. There's going to be, we can all have different theories on how can we mitigate this challenge or that challenge. And I'll speak to the fact that we look at the issue of drugs and the illicit substance, the distribution of it, and all these things, and we know, okay, we can we know if if it's coming from certain places. We've made massive investments into our port networks, and we're actually seeing record seizures of drugs happening daily. But now then what you see is the organized crime, they'll pivot. We're seeing things happening here where we're now it's synthetically being made here and it's being exported. So now we're an exporter of so they're just using whatever chemicals to make things, and in the end then we have to look at like why is there an insatiable appetite for the use of drugs, right? It comes down to the mental wellness of people and the well-being, what trauma they've been in. So the work needs to be done there then. These are, we can be reactionary, we can be proactive on all of these things. We have to understand it, and we have to tackle it in every way, every single which way possible.
Yeah, that's definitely really cool, like the multifaceted ways of the structural reasons that gangs exist and how they draw from different powers was really, really, really cool. Now moving on to something we found really interesting is that you're one of the key members in the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, and we find it as like a very, very cool committee, especially all the work you guys do regarding the Conflict of Interest Act. But for all the viewers at home who are unfamiliar with this committee, we are wondering if you could give an overview of what important work is conducted there.
Yeah, so like all committees, studies, a motion will be put forward to, hey, we need to study this. And typically for ethics, it can encompass so many different things, right? It can encompass the fact that we have a huge public service, so many different departments and people operating there. Are they doing their job? Are they doing it ethically? Because there's instances like where something may happen where some type of a project wasn't carried out properly. We need to study that. Why? What happened? Right? So that can come in. And then there's other things where if it comes down to the well-being of Canadians and our policies being helpful and how can we tackle this, right? There's things like the whistleblower legislation, for example, was a very important one, right? There's other aspects of government that government work and general work that's being done in partnership with government, outside of government, is that being conducted in a proper order, right? So that's just the study piece of it. Those are different, and it's one of the busiest sort of committees in terms of meetings, right? And it's important work, no doubt.
For sure.
It can be taxing in the sense that there's so much information coming at you, and we have to formulate questions. We have witnesses come in, experts come in, and one of the studies we wanted to do was on social media, the impact of social media on Canadians, their privacy, right? The privacy of Canadians. Things. We even did a study. RCMP was using facial recognition technology of some sort, right? And we conducted that study on how accurate is it, how invasive is it on Canadians, right? Is it accurately, does it know who Jason is? Does it know who Jerry is? Right. So I mean, I think that's sort of the broad of strokes of that. From there, once you've conducted your meetings, the studies, and the series of meetings thereafter with the respective witnesses, experts that come in, you have academics that would understand that topic, or even the people who say created that program. Who we had the people from TikTok come in, for example, on a social media study. We had the TikTok, the Google folks, the Facebook people, and all of the different platforms, the representatives come in and to explain to us, it's extremely influential what you're doing and what's being shared on those platforms. Like, are you doing it in a responsible way? Right? So, and then a report would be generated from that, from what we heard, and then the recommendations will be made, which would be tabled in Parliament and go further to do the necessary changes or the work that we need to. So that's sort of in a nutshell, the work of a committee. And ethics, I mean, I encourage you guys to tune in.
Yeah, for sure.
It's always something going on where I quite frankly believe that, a lot of people might watch sort of Question Period and think that's the work that's being done. I think most of the work that's being done in the House of Commons and in Ottawa, with respect to holding people accountable for the work that's being done, etc., is being done in the committees.
For sure. Yeah. And in regards to that, we know one of the most recent initiatives of this committee is really discussing the impact of disinformation and misinformation on the works of parliamentarians. And I think this is something so important, especially given our current political climate with AI-generated images, fake news, and especially with a lack of policing measures and ways to really mitigate these types of harmful information from actually occurring in the first place. So we know you're a very big advocate for the truth and really just cracking down on these types of harmful information. So we were wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the importance of tackling misinformation and disinformation specifically in politics, and if you could share some effective strategies or measures that could be implemented to really cut down on the amount of misinformation that's being spread.
Yeah, I think, let's just, we can continue on from what sort of I mentioned in terms of some of the studies that we did. But I think if you look at it, misinformation and disinformation, I believe, is the most dangerous piece of warfare that we as Canadians and citizens, democracies around the world are facing.
For sure.
Right? It's actually not something that's really new. The only difference is more people have access to misinformation, disinformation, right? So you can go back to old wartime and Germany and how Hitler controlled the radio because it was state radio. They were able to say whatever, and then there is no other. There was no other opinion. There was no other. There was nobody else to sort of challenge. Oh, that's it. Well, they said it. That's what's happening, right? So now, at least we have varying views and varying opinions on social media. But the thing is, what is real? What isn't? What's with the bots? Right? Who's creating them? Where are they coming from? We got a lot of work to do. We got to figure out, when it comes to AI, we've introduced a huge measure to actually bring in artificial intelligence to deliver a lot of different things because it could help with efficiencies, right? But then again, it poses a risk. It could also help us combat. Where's all this information coming from? So when we have our cyber security, an increase in the security of information, I think that is one of the biggest measures, I would say, that we're taking right now. And if you look at C-70s, a very important piece of legislation that was very quickly actually brought in. It was well written, and everyone ultimately agreed that we need to do this, right? Because what are we talking about? It's no longer like boots on the ground and people knocking on your door, right? It's now information is very powerful, and whoever can win the information war, in a sense, ultimately is now they can be labeled as this is the right thing to do. Right? And so that's why communication is so important. And we talk about being an effective communicator, etc., and all these things. But it's so big that even I, for example, I'm trying to do my job here, and at the same time, I have to communicate what I'm doing to the community, and that's another job, right? Getting that, okay, we got to get. So you're working on things, your projects, this, that. Which takes the big effort. Then you have some staff that can help and get that message out to people. So it's like it's an important integral part. But then there's somebody on the other side saying, no, this guy's not doing anything. And they might say it 5 times. I might only say I did this once. They're saying 5 times. They're like, oh, no, 5 times they said this guy's doing nothing. Right? So that's what we're up against. No policing or all these other issues, I think, is part of some of the rules that are being brought in to make these platform operators and owners be accountable too, right? How safe? What safety mechanisms are they putting in? Those are the questions that we asked a lot of the platform. What are they, founders, right?
Yeah.
And how can you tell us, like, are you eliminating? For example, Elon Musk went in and bought Twitter and X now, and how actively is his organization working to eliminate bots, foreign messages that are maybe coming from somewhere else? What guidelines are in there to say, you know what, you have to establish real identity. Yeah, what, the check mark? That's like that. But what about all these other people that are on there, right?
Yeah.
Like who are they? Where are they coming from? So you can be inundated with all kinds of sorts of things. So that's a scope of what it is. And if you look at like the C70, one of the biggest pieces there is the security of information.
Yeah.
The Security of Information Act hasn't been changed for over 40 years, which we did now.
Yeah.
Right? And that was one piece I really strongly pushed for. It was something that came out of the ethics committee where the folks from CSIS, the directors, and they said, I said, like, how can we, and I posed a question, like, what's the enforcement piece here? Whether it's foreign or domestic, and there's like Security of Information Act, there's mechanisms in there. We can strengthen it, and we've added that. We've added 3 new offenses. We've put forward measures where, more resources to CSIS, of course, and given them more ability to actually do the enforcement piece. They're not like, their whole objective is just to collect information, really, right, and really be. And now it's a matter of, can we look at signal intelligence, right? Be able to zone in on what message is coming from, right? We need to be able to, so it's a cyber security and sharing of information, and some of the investigations, we can't go really too much into like each specific investigation, but a lot of the intelligence we receive that we have with our allies is from the signal intelligence. Where is this coming from? And then they can say, hey, someone's targeting you over here because we're seeing some of this activity here.
Yeah.
And that's how we're going to combat it. So, and not only combat it in that way, make sure that there's enforcement measures, there's actual laws that are written that need to be adhered to. So those are some recent. That's recent, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really cool just to see the power of media, like spreading to the wrong people and the detrimental consequences it can have. So for the last part of our interview, we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit more about youth issues. So in recent years in Canada, there's been, unfortunately, a slight decline in terms of youth participation and youth engagement in politics, whether that manifests in like low youth voter turnout rates in past years, or less youth just coming forward and saying like, this is an issue I care about, like this is an issue I want solved. So we just wanted to ask you, in your opinion, in what aspects can the youth become more engaged within the political sphere and help tackle some of the issues that we talked about previously that Canada currently faces?
Yeah, I think things like this is great. I'm really encouraged to see you guys. And I'm actually encouraged by a lot of youth, and I don't know if it's maybe a Richmond thing, but I like to always plug Richmond and the great, students that we have here. But, and I go to graduations, and I hear the message that everybody gives, and I'm really I'm like, wow, this generation and other generations obviously before them too, but there's a lot of smart kids out there, and I even when I was teaching, and someone asked me how's this generation? And it was like, I'm teaching the post millennial in the next sort of what is it now, Gen Z? Or
I don't know.
Whatever. Let's stay away from the labels, right? But ultimately, and I said, you know what? They're able to do multiple things.
Yeah.
Right? They're better at multitasking. Whereas the old folks like me back in the day, we'd zero in on maybe one thing, master it or whatever, and focus, right? Which is great. We need the experts, of course, right? But I just think that times have changed, right? And I think that that's one strong aspect I see of the youth. But the piece where they're being disenfranchised a little bit with the government and what we some like to say the establishment. It's actually because I believe of the misinformation, disinformation. I think it's being done in a targeted way and on the platforms, and I think it's a way to destabilize our democratic countries.
Wow.
And I think it's being done from abroad. So because we've had so much stability, in the West, in Western countries, and for years, right? I think we're a target. So, and I don't mean that to sort of scare the next generation, but I'm saying it as a motivator.
Yeah,
so we got to be smart. We have to really be involved, be engaged. You guys need to be engaged. I think civics and other platforms are doing a great job of coming. Civics come to Ottawa. They interview us, and there's young people involved. They're engaged. We need more of that. How strong are our student councils? How engaged are they with your local representative offices, right? So I think that's a huge part. If each school has a student council, their first job should be, we're going to go meet our MP, we're going to go meet our MLAs, and we're going to go to City Hall.
Yeah.
Right? That should be their big thing, right? So it's not just about, putting on the best, what do you call it? Before a big game, what did they used to have? We used to have, it was called the sock hop, but that's old school now. I don't think they have that. Anyways, when you get I'm talking Richmond High, okay? We had great sports teams.
Yeah.
And before the big games, when you're going to go play someone, you would have a rally at lunchtime and these kinds of things, right? It's again, I think our student council bodies should have it in their own sort of mandate to. That's one way. That's just one way that can be work, at least in terms of engaging them more, and then being more aware of what messages that platforms are, and I think that we need to ultimately raise awareness of that at some capacity and at the school level and our educators, and I'd be interested to know how much of the misinformation, disinformation piece is being shared among students.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Just following on that, we just wanted to get your thoughts regarding the voting age of Canada. Do you potentially think if we lower the voting age down to 16, it will encourage more youth to be actively engaged in politics and more youth to go show up at the polls and voice their opinions? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's a little bit different if we follow up on how you said. You showed statistics that they're not engaged. And then are they informed enough to make the right decisions if they're not engaged, right? So I look, I have no problem with the younger people having the ability to vote. If you can drive at 16, right? Why not? But it's also a time when I think that I look at back at myself. I'm 16. I'm still in school.
Yeah.
I'm influenced by a lot of different things. A lot of things are just popularity or whatever. Do you really understand the issues? And I don't want to minimize the knowledge that the young people have. But I think it's a debate that we need to definitely have, and it needs to be a proper, healthy debate across the country. And it should include, young people need to come forward and they need to say it. It can't be like, when someone that's in their 60s, 50s saying, "Oh, let's lower the age so younger people can vote." The young people need to come forward, organize themselves, and say, "We want to be able to be voting, and this is the age we want."
For sure. Yeah. Thank you for that. And a fun question to end everything off. We know you're extremely committed to your community, and we know you show up to all sorts of events. And specifically, I think we talked about this at the very beginning, you are very, very heavily involved within the sports scene, not only in Richmond, but across the nation as well. We know you were there at the table tennis tournament that both of us attended, and you host so many cool events, whether it be the Dolphin Park basketball tournament, among so many others. And we know you're a big soccer fan, or in European terms football. I don't want to offend anyone by saying the wrong version. And we know you're also a soccer coach. So our last question to you is, if you could only play one sport for the rest of your life, and it cannot be soccer or football, what would that sport be?
It's a good question. I'm not the greatest skater. I love hockey. I would say ice hockey, maybe. Or I'll give two. I like either ice hockey or basketball.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, these are very cool sports. All right, I think that concludes our interview today. Again, Jerry and I would like to extend such a huge thank you to MP Bains and his phenomenal team for this amazing opportunity. Specifically, MP Bains for taking the time out of his very, very busy schedule to meet with us today. We truly, truly appreciate it. I think throughout the conversation, Jerry and I learned so much and we feel really inspired after it. So thank you so much. For all the listeners at home, if you guys wish to see more episodes like this, be sure to tune into interviews in future weeks. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you guys next time.
Cool.
Thanks,
Thank you
guys.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Awesome, yeah.
Thank you.